Good day to you as a listener. I wanted to, again, as a precursor to the first step, I think there are some preliminary ideas and thoughts worth considering before considering the steps, because we're going to consider them from the mental point of view, which is the core of the addiction. And I know that I've talked about identification. We've talked about, you've been listening, if you've been listening, and I think Jack 1, Jack 2, has been about identification, beginning to notice that if we identify a problem, we are the one identifying with it. And that if we're honest about it and we're suffering from it, then we are the ones creating it. If we're looking at the mental state, we're starting to notice that if I'm identifying with the problem, I am causing the problem. I am, in some way, how and what I am thinking about things is what I'm struggling with. Well, not the things that are happening, because things are always just happening the way they're happening. It's my interpretation, what I call my perception. And I would say if I think my perception is real, just like if I think my thoughts are the creator of reality, that's misperception. And misperception, it's often said that addiction is a disease of perception, but it's really a disease of misperception and misunderstanding and mistaken identity. So if I think I'm not the one doing the thing I'm trying to resolve, I think I'm irresponsible for what I'm doing if I am in fact doing the thing that I'm saying I'm not responsible for. And what that leads to is I'm not responsible. There's nothing I can do about it. So I'm just resigned to continue to do it over and over and over and over and over again. And imagine there's nothing at all that I can do about it. Again, coming from that step 2. First is I'm not responsible. Second is there's nothing I can do about it. If I'm not responsible, obviously there's nothing I can do about it. And as a result, I can only keep doing the thing that's wrong, which is exactly what addicts tend to do. Drink more, drug more, use more, get more, find more, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And it's all coming from a thought. If, as they said when I was early on in coming to Alcoholics Anonymous, it's very hard to go out and drink once you have a belly full of AA, because AA is saying, oh, you think you have power over alcohol. This getting into the first step a little bit. And if I think I have power over something that I have no power over because it's illusory, it's exactly what I'm doing in my mentality when I think I have nothing to do with something and then feel there's nothing I can do about it. And that's just a stalemate, literally a stalemate. The mate in that relationship I have, that self I think I am, that I've made up, is at a standstill. I'm the cause of it, and the effect of it I'm trying to disclaim while I'm causing it. Doesn't make any sense. But I'm free to do it. And I certainly did it long enough, and I certainly still do it today to any degree that I am maintaining ideas that are not true, that I rely on as though they are. It creates an internal conflict, emotional turmoil, mental anguish, to make believe there's nothing I can do about it. So part of what I wanted to talk about today is, like in the last podcast that was, I think, uploaded last week. If we are clever enough in our own thinking, and I wouldn't call it clever, I would call it diabolical. If we are clever enough in our own thinking, or diabolical enough in our own thinking, to make believe that the word ego has turned from the I am, the source of my experience, my essence as a being, my human experience, into a false self that I now think I need to monitor and maintain, then that's a pretty good bit of evidence through history. We talked about this in the last episode. Through history, that word has always meant I am, the I, capital, like we capitalize God and all the absolute truth, reality, all things absolute are typically capitalized to signify that they are something distinct from relative things, just things that are interacting and changing all the time. These are things that don't change, they're just absolute in nature. If truth and reality and love, which would be, I would say, the sum total of truth and reality, if it's something that never changes and it's always available in its entirety, that's a pretty loving, generous source. And if I'm thinking of it only in terms that I'm thinking of it, and then thinking that's real, and then convert the narrative about it into, use the words that are based, it's like using truth and then turning it into what I call my truth. If truth is true, then that's the nature of our existence, period. It's the nature of existence, not just our existence, but certainly as we're talking about humans right now, we seem to be the ones struggling with this. The animals don't seem to be, except to the degree that we have imposed things on them that are not equitable and not considerate, that they're struggling with. Toxins, pollutants, any kind of stuff that we've had an impact on creating that hasn't been healthy. So if I'm able to convert the language in a simple way, like this idea of ego turning into this thing we call false self, and then think the false self has to be focused on until it becomes the true self, we are misidentifying the whole fact of what absolute means, which is exactly what the steps all came from, were the four absolutes: honesty, purity, unselfishness, and love. Now, those are absolute honesty, absolute purity, absolute love, absolute unselfishness, meaning no self. Doesn't mean unselfish. It means no self, selfless, meaning there is no self. Exactly the point of this conversation. But if I'm clever enough to develop a narrative and then share it with everybody and think it becomes truth because everybody believes in it, think of that conspiracy in terms of human history. Coming to a point where we think a lie becomes true. And it wouldn't be a lie if it were true. It never would have been a lie. This is all concocted concepts in thought. It isn't thinking that's the problem. Thinking at its base root is managing and operating our bodies sufficiently without us having to think of it at all until something goes wrong. And that's a very good example, something to notice and pay some attention to, that the operations of the brain, which is where I suspect the human thinking comes from. I think we have a knowingness that is absolutely intact, that isn't a thinking process. It's a simple knowingness. We just know we know. And you've had experiences, I will almost guarantee it, where you knew something. And if somebody said, how do you know? You just, I don't know. I know. I just know it. You can feel it. You can sense it. Everything seems to line up. That's our nature. And we have windows of that, little specks that seems like light gets through and we might notice. And the dark is all the other thoughts trying to block. And we're using them that way to try to justify the maintenance of them, to continue to have them seem like they're blocking light, which it can't do. They can't do. So we have shadows of doubt that we cast, because the cast that we're playing is a character that doesn't exist. And we make believe the longer we think about it, the more true and real it's going to become. Not going to happen. Illusion is imagination. And imagination is an extraordinary potential we have to consider doing things that are fully beneficial for everyone, everywhere, all the time. In equal measure, if we can affect everyone in a negative way, we can absolutely affect them in ways that are positive. And the only distinction between the two, because they're not separate within the confines of possibility, negative and positive are always happening simultaneously. And it's one of the points I wanted to make today. That in looking at the steps from an absolute point of view is starting to see that opposites are the same thing. They rely on each other. They have an absolute place in each other. Up and down are connected. One would not be without the other. Left and right are connected. In and out is connected. Right and wrong is connected in that regard. And the difference between principles, spiritual principles, is they operate on a basis of what works. And what works is the result. The effect is the result of our thinking. So if you begin to notice the effects you're having, if it's reactivity, impulsivity, compulsivity, for instance, irritability, restlessness, discontent. Think of the words, discontent. There's no content. It's like turning on Netflix and having nothing to watch and they still demand payment. There's no content for you that's available. Discontent is that awareness. We have a body language that's absolutely clear that we treat like it's a foreign language and don't understand when we think of it as something that, because it's uncomfortable, we need to get away from and refuse to acknowledge and get over and feel better about. That's exactly what the root of addiction is about. So cause and effect. Cause always precedes effect, but effect is simultaneous. It's just like standing in front of a mirror. As soon as you're in front of it, it doesn't wait a minute to tell you what you look like. But it isn't you in the mirror, it's an image of you, and that image is backward, which is a very good description of the backward thinking we do when we make believe that the imaginary thoughts that we have, the thoughts about things, how and what we think about things, are true and real and conclusive. When in fact, a considerate approach to life is to always consider that whatever we're doing in that regard may be wrong. There may be elements of it, threads of it, just like one mistake in math, arithmetic, at the most fundamental level of the most complicated mathematical formula is going to make the whole thing wrong in some way. If there's a speck of dust on a telescope, it destroys the ability of that telescope to create images that are accurate, because it creates a sense of fuzziness, a sense of distortion. And this distortion that we're experiencing is all created by this internal conflict that we make us believe is true and think that is cloud cover and the sun's not out and the shadows haunt us and all that stuff. They're all coming from a narrative. Thinking about opposites as positions, opposition. When I think my thoughts are right, I think the position I take is the only position. When in fact, if I'm thinking principally, difference between principles, which again, steps are based on the absolute, but they're based on principled actions, affirmative actions, not based on any action, because drinking is an action and lying is an action and violence is an action. And none of those are suggestions of the big book or anything I've ever read in AA literature. It's about peace and it's about unity and it's about productive, beneficial actions where everybody benefits. Whether they accept it or not, whether they choose to go along with it or not, somebody who's trying to get sober, is their business. Because if I'm free to think what I want, I begin to respect that so too is everyone else. And if somebody wants to continue down the path of addiction, they're absolutely free to do that. And nobody's going to tell them otherwise. You can corral them, you can do all kinds of things to manipulate them into making believe that now they know. But until they truly decide, honestly decide, exactly as the big book says, deep down, admit to our innermost self. Think of that. How deep does that have to be buried for it to be innermost? Maybe it seems out of reach because of that deep down place that we think it's kept. But it also says God is in each of us. And if it's God in an infinite sense, then it can't be deep down. It must be superficial and it must be immediate and it must be accessible and in reach right now, available right now, always. And the major failing is to think I have to get there rather than I am there. Now I'm not talking about myself. I am thinking about myself. I am talking to myself. I am thinking of myself. I am talking about I am here now, period. So too are you. We are here now together. It doesn't matter where you are, and it doesn't matter what time you listen to this. We're talking about a timeless, dimensionless state of being, an essence that is essential. And to begin to ponder this and to think of things, think of the present being always new, it's always beginning. So it means there's no end. That's a little confounding to the thinking we do, because if we start something, we expect it to end at some point. We expect some kind of result. And we always get a result. We just don't always like the result we get. So this is about learning to look at what we're doing, how we're doing it, in relation to the thinking we're doing about things. Not the thinking. It's not about thinking. That base root of thinking is operating perfectly to allow us the freedom to choose right or wrong in our own thinking, and then think the right thinking is wrong or the wrong thinking is right. That's how free we are. But the evidence of the disturbance, just as the book says, 12 and 12 says in the 6th step, whenever we are disturbed, no matter the cause, meaning we cannot be a victim to this. Doesn't matter how it happened. Whenever we are disturbed, something is wrong with us. Something is wrong with how we're thinking about what's going on. It's not about thinking, it's about how we think about our thinking. It's about how we think about each other. It's about what we think about each other and life and reality and truth. That's where the potential for dysfunction occurs. And that dysfunction isn't in the universe, it's in our thinking. It's in the thinking we're doing about our functional capacity. Our nature is responsible, period, absolute. And we're free, absolutely free, to choose anything we want. And with that freedom comes the same responsibility to notice that the effects we're witnessing are the ones we're causing. You and I individually are causing them, but we are affecting everyone as a result of that because we operate in a field of energy that is affected by what we do. And we too are also affected by everything else that's happening, by everything else and everyone else right now. And if we have a spiritual nature and are thinking in spiritual terms, in being terms, in present terms, in absolute terms, as a primary form of thought, beginning to notice that that is our nature and align our nature with that, all the subsequent potential conflicts that we've been living in and thinking we are stuck in and thinking we cannot escape, all of a sudden start becoming specks of dust on a telescope. They don't become a blind spot in the whole telescope and the magnification of that. The distortion goes away. A thought just becomes a thought we're having about something that must be wrong to have me feel that restlessness and that irritability and that discontent. And to feel the inner conflict and the emotional turmoil and distress and the mental anguish. All of those are road signs. And we're welcome to blow past the road sign and pretend that it means speed up when it's saying 20-mile-an-hour curve ahead. We're welcome. But we are also welcome to accept the consequences of those choices and actions. And that's beginning to apply principles in all our affairs. So we're sort of going from 1 to 12 in this conversation. So if the opposites are always there, when I take a position and I think my thoughts are real, I think it's the only position and now every other position threatens me. That's based in a thought I have. That's not based in reality, because reality says if I am free to take a position, so too is everyone free to take that position that they're taking. Everyone. And when I take a position, it isn't because I can't or shouldn't take it. It's to help me understand that everyone else also has that absolute freedom. Whether I like it or not, whether I think it's right or wrong or should be or shouldn't be is irrelevant. The fact is, if I'm able to take a position and think it's the only position, so too is everyone else. But it starts to make it very, very clear that that's the kind of mentality that has led to war through human history, and the idea that we need to kill other people and maim them and subject them to horror and depress them and suppress them in the name of what they're thinking because they don't think like us. That self-righteous indignation grows out of that thinking because we're thinking about reality as though it's divisible and that my position can be the right position and all other positions can't be right. So when I see the unity of opposites, they're just positions taken. And I can take any position I want. When I start to see conflict, I know the position I've taken is what I think is true and real, not just a simple position. Just like I think my thought is real, I think the positions I take represent reality. They don't. They just represent positions I've taken. And as a result, they have effects. What thoughts do is manifest effects. And when I think things shouldn't be happening, I am not thinking honestly about the things that are happening, because if things are happening and absolutely as they are right now, there's nothing else that can be happening. So for me to think it shouldn't be happening is to make believe once again that I am the creator of reality and going to change all reality by my own insistence to continue to demand something that is impossible to ever achieve. And then witness the impossibility and think life is hard and life is impossible and everybody in it is difficult and all those other kind of things that come out of it. None of those are true. They're just byproducts and effects created. We don't get more by giving away all that we have. we begin to experience that fullness is always present, and there's always more than we think when we imagine anything can be kept to our supposed self as though it's a secret. If I'm harboring ideas and think I need to work them out before I can talk to people, I'm not being honest about the fact that I think I need to figure them out because I'm so desperate to be right and not seen as wrong. And the freedom is to express the wrong as quickly as you have the thought and share it and talk about it and be open. And it becomes laughable that we ever took it so seriously as to think it was something we needed to cultivate. We needed to cultivate rotten vegetables and fruit to feed our body. It's essentially what we're doing with the food for thought that we're developing in that regard. Anybody can have a horrible thought, and I have plenty of them. And not everybody acts out on those thoughts. And this is about starting to notice that the horror of the idea that I have to act out on the thought comes from the idea that it's the only thought that's possible. All this stuff about thinking thoughts are reality rather than just thoughts, which are imagined, they're clearly something that we don't even understand as a species what they are. We just know we have them. We don't see them, but what we see are the effects. So part of this today is noticing that everything within the confines of change, the thoughts we have, the consequences we create, all of that is part of a seamless whole, ultimately. The old philosophers said the one thing about everything changing that doesn't change is that everything changes. So when you're thinking about this on a global, universal, absolute level, everything starts to make sense. When to think about it on a divisible level creates inequity and indiscriminate ideas and division amongst us, because we're trying to divide something that if there's an infinite source, it's naturally infinite, it's naturally whole, it's naturally complete. And to think of it only from the narrow thinking we're doing about it creates other impressions. And too many of those impressions maintained too long create depression, because the impressions actually carry the weight of resistance that we create and insist on maintaining, and wonder why those conditions persist. That's defiance and defense and denial in full swing as a weapon against our own experience, because it's the inner argument we're having that causes the perception, the wrong perception, the misperception that it's everything and everyone else causing it and not me. And we are the only ones, each of us has the freedom to think whatever we want. And that is a principle because it's the same freedom that everyone has. Doesn't mean we're going to come up with the same answer. It doesn't mean we're going to think in the same way. And I would say we never do. It's one of the things we do uniquely. So when I'm trying to figure out what somebody else is thinking about my thinking, or if I'm thinking about what they're thinking and worried about it, I'm generally worried about my thinking, and I'm wondering what they're thinking about my thinking because I feel I'm ignoring my own awareness that something I'm thinking is wrong. So I'm wondering if they see it and they understand it and they notice it. And it keeps me a little on edge to operate on that basis. But as I began to see that this principle was principled for everyone, what people thought didn't matter to me. It mattered enough for me to allow them to think it and have it. Just like Bill said to the guy that thought he could control and enjoy his drinking, our hats are off to you. Go try. Over any measurable amount of time, you're going to see that if you have this disease, you're going to fail at it. But it's the individual, each of us, since we have that freedom, that makes the decision as to whether we're going to face things honestly. And through history, this has been thought to be the hardest thing to do, because we've been trying to do it from the sick thinking that created it, rather than start to see that that isn't our source at all and never has been. We have a knowing nature. We have an absolute nature. We have an awareness that's at perfect peace all the time, or we wouldn't be so clear about the disturbances that we experience. How would we know if the disturbing nature of nature was disturbing? Disturbances wouldn't even register on our barometer or temperature scale or the Richter scale of our earth shaken situation in our own interior experience. Wouldn't even register because it would be so common, it would be our nature. But it isn't common within our nature, because our nature is at absolute peace because it is not divisible. It is not inequitable. It's absolutely equitable. It is not discriminate. It's indiscriminate. It's indivisible. It's equitable, shared by all equally, because there is no amount. It's a realm that really, if you contemplate this, is the beginning of an eyes open meditation. When you begin to see everything that's going on is part of this absolute realm, it takes away the sting of the presumptions that we each have the capacity to make in relation to things as being intractable and impossible to change. And I will guarantee you and assure you that you will have some thought about this as and if you think about this accurately, where you start to see things in a form of wonder as you wander through the thoughts in your imagination in relation to what's happening, and begin to imagine that nobody else is ever going to come to that conclusion. And to a degree, you're right, because it's your experience they're never going to come to. But in the other sense of the indivisible nature we share, they will have the exact same right to come to their own experience with it and call it what they do in their own way, which is exactly what a God of your own understanding was giving us the chance to do. To break down the barriers and start to see that we can have it any way we want, because we have it in any way we want when it comes to thinking, because we're free to think about it. But if we're thinking about it as a man somewhere else in some other place and not here, we're not thinking about it principally. We're thinking about it divisibly. Our thinking is causing the impacts we're having when we think we need to have more and more and more and more faith that never seems to be enough, because our faithless idea that's rooted in a lack of faith and a lack of hope, because it has no hope and it has no faith, because it's an impossible concept, is driving that train of thought. So the absolute nature of the present is not in conflict whatsoever, because it's at perfect peace, perfectly still. There are no parts or pieces to be in conflict. There is no more or less whatsoever. There is no there and then whatsoever. It's always present. And for us in human terms, that means here now. So if there's any problem that you have, it's both being created now and it can be solved now. This is where it's done. Where you are is you have exactly what you need, always. You may not think so, and therein, again, lies the problem. It's how you're thinking about that absolute principle. Start to define those words. Look up absolute and infinite and omniscient and omnipotent, all-knowing, omniscient, all awareness, all consciousness, pure for all, everyone, not something that's divisible. To begin to contemplate that with your eyes open is a meditation. And I would say it's an accurate meditation, because it also allows you to begin to confront and interact with the world you're in, rather than sit quietly with your eyes closed and imagine the only time you can achieve that is when you're imposing an experience that's peaceful. This allows the potential to begin to look out there and see it. And I don't do that all the time. And I don't talk about this because I want you to think that I do. I have great failings, and find them along the way and notice them and live with that, and don't always concede them very quickly. But I talk about it. That's what I'm here to do, is talk about it. I'm not telling you anything you don't know, but I'm talking about it in a way that might make us all a little more functionally literate in our capacity to work together and to develop goals that are worth achieving, rather than another sick crusade to get more and more and more of something that's never going to be enough. And I watch it happening within sobriety, with people who have decades of sobriety, still looking for that thing, still trying to get enough, still trying to have it, and suffering without admitting it often, until they're completely beyond the capacity to contain it anymore. Why do we need to get to the point where we're almost at a break point to begin to be honest about the facts that with the things that we're breaking? We don't, but we choose it. And I would say that's part of the mental addiction. Addiction is an alarm. How and what we're thinking about thinking is a choice. Thinking's primary purpose is to operate in favor of our nature, which is to survive and thrive, not to figure out how to destroy and conquer and divide and conquer. That is not the goal. And I would suggest the only fight we're having is the one we think we're having with the self that seems out of control, when if you think of the words out of control means there's no control in it. And that's a good precursor to the discussion about the first step. Anyway, my love, my peace, as it is ours. It's another day to practice. Practice is a discipline. The best artists, the best athletes, the best academics practice on a daily basis. I used to sit on the couch and hope and want and think that more of that kind of hopeful thinking would get me somewhere. But I wasn't practicing actively amongst other people and divulging the insight that I had along the way. I was waiting till I got it right to finally make my move. And I do less of that today, which is part of why I do this publicly and yet maintain anonymity. Anonymity at its core is conceding that we are faceless, personaless, characterless beings. There's no face whatsoever to that. On its surface, it's a chance for people to recognize that the stigma attached to admitting things wrong, like addiction, like mental problems, mental disorders, can be done amongst a group that to some degree is going to maintain your privacy until you decide you want to talk about it at a broader level. Coming out in that regard is the beginning, coming out of the closet per se, this mental closet, thinking we're locked into it, is beginning to talk openly about the issues. And I guarantee you, they will dissolve as quickly as you look at them accurately, because those moments of clarity are that spiritual experience, that psychic change that Carl Jung was talking about and that Bill talked about. It's being honest about what's actually happening. When you are, boom, there's an awareness and a sense of knowing and a sense of place, exactly as it's described on page 84 and 85. We were taken to a place of neutrality, as though we were taken there. We didn't do anything to get there. It's admitting this, safe and protected. We didn't even swear off drinking. We just knew we no longer had any obligation to do it. And I will tell you from my experience, and it may be worth considering, it wasn't until I realized I was absolutely free to pick up a drink and pick up a drug and do those things, absolutely free, that I started seeing the consequence clearly, because I was no longer creating so much turbulation and conflict with the initial thought. I was starting to see the consequences without any doubt. And I knew, and I know today exactly where that will go if I start. And I'm free to start. But I'm also free to create a sense of condemnation that gives me the opinion that because I'm denying and ignoring what's happening, that it's a surprise when I find myself at a bar hammering on it exactly as Bill Wilson did. How did I get here again? If I'm acting in ways where I'm denying reality, I'm going to pretend I don't see and I don't understand. And there's nothing else for me to do but the stupidest thing I could possibly come up with. So our conversation is not learning to dumb things down and try to feel better about things, but start to have things as they are, because they are, as they are. And even if they're wrong and we're in conflict, it's okay to have them as they are, because as soon as you do and look at it, they will dissolve as quickly as you allow them. If I don't have what I have, I immediately think I have to have something else. It's never enough. That's an addictive tendency, and it all comes from thinking about things, not thinking at its core, but how we think about things, what we think about things. I leave you with all that you have and all that you are, and the chance to face these things has always been present, and it's simply a choice that we're all capable of making, because we are making the choice to contrive all those other experiences that we think are impossible to bear. That is a free choice we're making. If you look at it that way, you're going to say what I've heard dozens of people say at my bar top in the kitchen. Well, that would be insane. And I say, ding. That's exactly what it is. We're free to do it. To do it is not the healthiest thing to choose. But starting to notice that our body is telling us what's happening if we're listening makes the whole process of undoing happen immediately as you start looking at it honestly. It's a disillusion here, not a resolution where we're constantly looking for new ways to fix it. This is a dissolving of something where it disappears because it's never been anything other than what we made believe it was. Peace.